Turn red and you're good to go.
Okay. Like Mr. McCulkey said, my name is Spencer Nichols. I was born and raised here in Big Piney. My dad was born in Big Piney, and my great-grandmother was the first white woman to spend a winter in Big Piney. There were Indians in here, but she was the first white woman to spend a winter in Big Piney. They dug a hole in a ditch bank up on North Piney, and that's where she spent the first winter. Now the other ranchers that were in here before they got there left their wives in Green River, and they came up and tended the cattle. So that's kind of a history of where I come from. I went to school grades 1 through 12 here in Big Piney. I graduated in 1964. After I graduated, I went to Utah State for a year, 2 years actually, a year and a half. I got drafted to go into the Army. When I got into the Army, of course, they give you aptitude tests on what they think you might be adapted for. I was chosen to get into a cryptographic school. Cryptographics is coding and decoding messages, and it's all done through electronic machines that either audio to digital or teletype to another teletype. I went to school after I received my top secret clearance, which I was real fortunate to start with, because my top secret clearance took way less time than most of them, because all they had to do was come to Big Piney and they knew everything about everything that I'd ever done. They had what they call the cage, which was where we got into the actual learning of the cryptographics. And you had to show an ID and the whole bit to get up there to go to this class. This was in Fort Monmouth, New Jersey. They had what they called phases, and they'd phase us through different phases of this cryptographic school. I was one of 3 that went all the way through. The valedictorian, or the high point guy, he was an electrical engineer that had got drafted. He chose to go to Germany. The second in the class chose to go to Italy, and I didn't have any choice. I went to Vietnam. After I got to Vietnam, well, maybe let me phrase that a little different. They took us all down to the Oakland Air Base and gave us a time to appear and register at Oakland Air Base. Once you got there and registered, they put you in the room and the door locked behind you, making sure that nobody could get out after they had registered to be there. The flight over, they flew us to Yokota, Japan, stopped there for refueling, and then right on into Tonkin Air Base, which is right adjacent to Saigon, commonly known now as Ho Chi Minh City, after they won the war. That's one thing that you probably want to remember is that's actually the only war we ever lost. Probably we had enough men. You've probably all seen the size of Vietnam. We had enough people in Vietnam, over 600,000, that you could stretch arm's length, each one of us, and we could have covered the whole country. That's how many soldiers were there. And actually, you could just about walk across Vietnam in a day, straight across. That's how small the country was. But the big problem was there was never really an intent to win that war. It started with our presence over in Southeast Asia. We, at that time, the news media, we knew just exactly what they wanted to tell us at the 5 o'clock news, and that was the sum total of what news anyone got about Vietnam. President Kennedy was an advocate of stopping the communist aggression. That was his big deal about Vietnam. After the 1964 election, which Barry Goldwater and Lyndon Johnson, Barry Goldwater said, we're going to move in, we're going to bomb them, we're going to get out. And it scared everybody, mothers especially, because they weren't about to send their sons over in a foreign country and have Barry Goldwater bomb the country. Lyndon Johnson says, oh, we're going to talk to them and we're going to have treaties this and treaties that, and it didn't work. Then came the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, which after a series of North Vietnamese and Chinese aggression against a couple of our ships, they passed the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. The House of Representatives, it was unanimous in the House of Representatives, and there was 2 votes against it in the Senate, was all. Everybody else was for the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, which gave Lyndon Johnson the authority to do whatever he wanted to do in the conflict over there. And they never did call it a war, they called it a conflict, as far as I know. This is my own interpretation of what's going on, because I was just a regular GI over there, actually. And when I got into the country, my assignment actually was, I was a cryptographic specialist. I was assigned to the 69th Signal Battalion, assigned to the 706 Signal Detachment, assigned to the 5th Special Forces in Vietnam. That's quite a return address that I had to put on an envelope when I sent my folks a letter. What my primary responsibilities were over there was to take control of all the cryptographic gear that was in Vietnam. I was in charge of the allocation of the cryptographic gear, the distribution of the cryptographic gear, and the repair of cryptographic gear. One thing I didn't tell the other guys, I had a workshop, an office. They put me in with, there was 22 officers and myself. It was a building right behind Wing Cao Key, who was, you may have heard about him. He was a pilot, a Vietnamese pilot who became the vice president of Vietnam and later the president of Vietnam, of the Republic of Vietnam. They had a great big tall fence, and all the guys that were in our detachment had built stair steps because he had a swimming pool behind there and really a knockout for a wife. So everybody did peer over the fence occasionally. But some of the main things that I ran into over there, I got over there in 1967. And that was the beginning of the escalation of the Vietnam conflict. Now, when I first got over there, they called the war off at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. They took Ho Chi Minh's birthday off. They took Christmas and New Year's. Everybody went downtown and had a drink, and nobody was really concerned about it because we were fighting the Viet Cong at that time. The North Vietnamese regulars had started to infiltrate, come down from North Vietnam and Chinese, but they hadn't really taken effect. We were mostly fighting the Viet Cong at that time. You probably read and heard about the Ho Chi Minh Trail, which is where most all of the supplies and the North Vietnamese regulars were coming down. And General Westmoreland and Robert McNamara, who was the Secretary of Defense at that time, did everything they could to stop them from coming down the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Their efforts were in vain because every time that they bombed it or wiped out a convoy, there was 2 or 3 others that got through somehow or another. One of the big things that our government decided to do at that time was use Agent Orange to defoliate along the Ho Chi Minh Trail and anywhere that there was a conflict. Now, Agent Orange it kills the foliage around. What they didn't let everybody know over there was it also causes cancer, birth defects. Right now there's 25 different cancers that they've found that Agent Orange causes. It causes diabetes, a whole list of things that our government is finally deciding to take note of. They have right now what they call an Agent Orange registry, which is that any veteran that came out of Vietnam from 1962 to 1975 is automatically registered in the Agent Orange registry, they call it, and are actually covered by the VA for whatever. I myself have multiple myeloma, which is bone marrow cancer, caused by the Agent Orange over in Vietnam. Last spring, they organized a Welcome Home Vietnam Veterans ceremony in Casper. There were 700 of us showed up, Wyoming Vietnam veterans. Out of the 700, 80% of them had some sort of an affliction from Agent Orange. That's one of the reasons why Vietnam is still brought up to this day. That's part of it. Our government didn't tell everybody everything about what was going on. That is the first war that we ever had correspondence, news people, with the troops out in the field. That's the first war that you ever saw the pictures of what was really happening at that time. As the war drug on, the United States became more and more disgruntled about what all was happening when they started getting the news that 30,000 troops were killed and going on, adding to that all the time. That's when they started turning against the war. Before that, it was, you know, when I first went in, we were fairly patriotic, you know. We thought we were doing all the good, especially coming from Big Piney, because we didn't know all this other stuff that was going on out there with the protesters, and we knew that it was happening, but not near like it was while I was over there anyway. Back to my main job over there was if a helicopter got shot down, or if there was a long-range reconnaissance patrol that had a piece of cryptographic gear and they didn't make it back, my job was to go find that piece of gear. And I had to account for it, either by getting the name tag off of it and blowing it up. I had incendiary grenades with me that I could destroy the piece of equipment as long as I got the name tag, or pack the piece of equipment out, one or the other. Now, I had, there were patrols. There was a team of special forces that always went in before I got there. They'd fly me in with a helicopter, and I had a little Vietnamese interpreter with me that I'm still not real sure what his job was other than interpreting. He watched me very closely, and he also alerted me that there may be a trap. This may be a trap to go in and get this downed helicopter. But there was always somebody, this group of special forces troops always went in before I got there, and they were always the last ones out after they got me out. So I was asking the other class if I ever killed anybody. I said I don't know. The reason why I said I don't know is I wasn't an offensive soldier at that time. I was a defensive soldier, and all I was doing was firing my rifle and whatever else I had for a screen so I could get out of there, so a helicopter could come and get me out of there. So I really don't know whether I ever hit anybody or not, but I made a lot of noise, I can guarantee you that. So that, to clear that up for everybody, that's what the story was. After they captured the Pueblo in 1968, which was a communication ship, they compromised all the security gear that I worked on over there. They compromised all the cryptographic gear because it was all on that ship, and that ship fell into communist hands at that time. So since I was the only one in country at that time that had security clearance enough to take on a new piece of gear, you have to understand, right at that time, now we were going from tube type electronics to solid state electronics, transistors, flip-flops, binary counters, all that kind of thing. So it was a whole brand new piece of gear, but Texas Instruments had already started working on a new piece of gear, so they sent a team of engineers over with me, and I wound up staying another tour in Vietnam because of that, to take over the gear until they could get other guys through the Cryptographic School at Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, and I had to stay till then. The day that, well, 3 days after I was out of the Army, they flew out and picked me up out of a rice paddy and said, "You're going in." And I said, "Great." And the old kid said, No, he says, you're going in. You're going into Saigon. You're done. They're flying you home." So I got to Long Binh, which was a replacement right next to Saigon, and they mustered me out. put me on an airplane. Well, I might tell you one little story. After I got my papers to get on the plane, I walked outside of the office there, and there was an soft ice cream stand right there. I'd never seen one in 2 years. That was the best ice cream I think I ever had. I liked Foundered now, I want to tell you. It was good. That was the 29th of December in 1968. They flew me home, and they put down in Oakland, at the Oakland Air Base, to discharge me. They marched us in and set us on the bleachers, and a plane load of dishonorable discharge soldiers from the Long Binh jail came in, and they discharged them before they did us. When we deplaned, to start with, there was demonstrations and demonstrators everywhere. There was MPs that lined the whole walkway. We couldn't figure out what the story was. Those MPs were to protect the demonstrators. They were spitting on us. They were throwing things. They had signs. It really shocked everybody there, because when we went over, there wasn't near the demonstrations. And all of a sudden, here we are in California, and man, they're throwing a fit. Then they discharged that load of dishonorable discharges. There were 30,000 dishonorable discharges from Vietnam. Soldiers that just refused to take orders, refused to get in the fight, and refused to do anything that the Army told them to do. They wound up in the Long Binh jail. They'd load them on a plane, bring them over here, dishonorably discharge them, and turn them loose on society. There was also 1,700 that burned their draft card and went to Canada during that period, during Vietnam time. And you've probably heard from some of the people about what those of us who served over there felt about those that went to Canada. I had no problem with them going to Canada, but they shouldn't have ever been invited back as heroes, as far as I'm concerned. That was my feelings on that. They told me that when I got discharged, that if I'd wear my uniform home, after all this commotion, that I could fly home standby, military standby, which was a half-price ticket. I told them it'd be a cold day in Hades that I would wear that uniform home. After the way we were treated there, I flew into Salt Lake, and here was more demonstrations all around. I came back to Big Piney, and guess what? It was just like I left it. They welcomed me home. They had absolutely no problem. Everybody had a comment about patriotism and this, that, and the other. It hadn't even touched Big Piney. Therefore, that's why I chose to stay here. So 52 years ago, I was sitting in the same place you guys are sitting, and after Vietnam, I came back here, and this is where I chose to stay. My two sons are graduates of Big Piney. My dad was a graduate of Big Piney in 1929. So we've been here a long time, and what I'm trying to say is this is a pretty good place to be from my point of view, because of that. And that's pretty well my story. You have any questions?
So I have a question. If juniors in high school today only learned or took one thing from their studies of the Vietnam conflict, what would you want it to be? If they walked out here and said, this is the only thing I learned or took from this whole conflict.
I think given the state of our country today, I think that probably the one thing that sticks out the most as far as, to me, the Vietnam conflict is the way that all of a sudden, or not all of a sudden, but the way the media handles everything from then till now. In other words, we were fed just exactly what they wanted us to know on the 5 o'clock news. That was it. That was the only thing that was said. We had a CIA, an FBI, and several other agencies, intelligence agencies, that nobody knew anything that was happening. When Bill Clinton got into to be the president, he gutted the CIA. We have no intelligence. We have no covert activities or anything now because everybody knows everything about what's going on. And that's the one thing that really preempted the Vietnam conflict and escalated the whole thing in the public's eye. And the reason why they got so tired of Vietnam was because of the news media covering the actual conflict itself. So that's probably what I would say would be something that really brought the Vietnam War to an end, or the Vietnam conflict, I should say, because they never did declare war. But everybody knowing everything about what was going on is one thing that was really sticks in my mind that Vietnam brought out to our country. And I'm not saying that the government was corrupt, but I am saying that if you didn't have the need to know, you didn't know it at that time. The need to know is the key to all the intelligence agencies and all the news that goes on. You hear about all the leaks that we have, Eric Snowden, some of the other, well, even Scooter Libby. You know, he's in prison right now because he outed one of the CIA operatives, Valerie Plame, because of top secret information that he had, that he leaked to the public. Do you know who's under investigation right now for the same thing?
Kerry Clinton.
Just exactly. So watch what happens. Sir?
Why would you say we lost the Vietnam War, in your opinion?
In my opinion, the reason why we lost the Vietnam War was the will to fight it from the United States, the people in the United States. We had enough people over there that we could have taken care of it. But as soon as they saw the atrocities or the things that went on over there, you know, John Kerry, our Secretary of State right now, testified when he got back from Vietnam that we were all a bunch of baby killers, rapists, and murderers. That's what he testified to Congress. You can see where he's at right now. He put a black mark on every Vietnam veteran that came back, actually. You know that when he decided to run for president, the Swift boaters, which came out and actually identified what John Kerry was over in Vietnam. He was a lieutenant on a swift boat. He put himself in for every medal he got. I can attest to that firsthand. So that just increased the public opinion to where that's what cost us the war, is just public opinion here in the United States. You know, at probably the height of the Vietnam conflict, the United States was spending $2 million a day to stop the communist aggression over there, which, whether it did or not, it remains to be seen, because now Saigon is called Ho Chi Minh City, and they've taken the whole thing over. So that's the one we lost. No two ways about it. Sir.
So, what would you say the morale was like for the troops who were in Vietnam? Like, we know what it's like when all the public opinion, but what about the troops themselves?
You know, the only thing that the news that we got in Vietnam was Armed Forces Radio. Have any of you ever seen the movie Good Morning Vietnam?
Yeah.
That's just exactly what we had for the radio, and everybody listened to that radio. That's all you could get, other than a couple of Chinese radio stations, and the Stars and Stripes, which is a newspaper published by the U.S. Army, and that's the sum total of what we knew. I probably knew more than the majority of the guys over there, because all you actually knew was what was your little unit was going on there. That's during the time when we had a lot of drugs over there, marijuana out in the field. It was prevalent everywhere. I myself, coming from Big Piney, had no clue what was going on. But that's the story over there. The morale generally was pretty high, except those people, those guys over there who were drafted out of the big cities that had nothing to look forward to anyway. A lot of the MIAs that are still over there, I think there's 2,500 or so that are unaccounted for. I know personally 2 or 3 that walked away from their duty station over there and blended into the society over there and are living high on the hog, because it's cheap to live over there. They more than likely had a girlfriend who was a Saigon tea lady, which made quite a bit of money having the GIs over there buy Saigon tea for them, and consequently it didn't take much for them to live over there and not have any responsibilities whatsoever versus what they were coming back to. So that's kind of what the story was over there. But like I say, it was a real eye-opener when we came back to Oakland and saw the demonstrations and the things that were going on here in the country that we didn't have any clue what was going on. Sir?
Did you carry sidearms? Because I know a lot of times M16s would jam when they...
I did. I had an AR-15. The M16s were a thing of the past over there, but I also had a sidearm that was a .45. Now, if you've ever had anything to do with the .45, they make a lot of noise, but they're not really accurate. You just, that was just a smoke screen to get out of somewhere. You could throw a lot of lead around, but very seldom did you hit anything you were shooting at. But we made a lot of noise with them. And I told the other class we had to qualify every month over there with our weapons. And what they did was give us a whole box full of ammunition, and you had to go out and spend that ammunition. They didn't care what you shot at. You just had to go out here in a vacant place, and we all shot the .50 calibers and the .30 calibers and the AR-15s and the handguns, and we even had a few BARs over there that some of the guys dug out to use, but whether we qualified or not, who knows? We just made a lot of noise. Anybody else? Sir?
Do you still talk to some of your veteran buddies?
Pardon me?
Do you still talk to some of your veteran buddies?
Yeah, I do. Mostly, I was an advisor to the Vietnamese over there while I was there. So I wasn't really in a great big unit at all, and I never, like I say, I was in with a bunch of officers who, officers and enlisted men, you know, they're kind of like this. They think that they got something over on everybody, and so I really wasn't very close to anyone over there. But I do have a lot of friends. One thing I want to let all of you know is for our Memorial Day ceremony out here at the Veterans Memorial at the Plainview Cemetery, this Lieutenant Lee Alley, is going to be our guest speaker out there. He is Wyoming's most decorated Vietnam veteran. He was put in for the Congressional Medal of Honor. He received the Distinguished Service Cross, Silver Star, Bronze Stars, and several Vietnamese commendations over there for gallantry and this, that, and the other. A good book. If you ever get a chance, pick that up and read it. It especially, well, it made a difference. A really good book for somebody who was over there. But I gave a list of the Vietnam veterans that are here locally that I could remember. One that you probably all know is Mac Rawhauser. He was over there too, along with Zoll Blackman, Reynolds Brown, Alan Kirkwood. Yeah, Reynolds was there. And I think there's probably several others, sir.
So one of the questions that these guys had to answer over the weekend was if you were LBJ in 1964 and the Gulf of Tonkin resolution was a blank check for you, the president, to do what you want or not want in Vietnam, what would you have done if you were LBJ? Knowing what you know now, having been there and experienced it firsthand.
If you don't love who you're fighting for and you don't hate who you're fighting against, you ought to stay out of there. That makes sense to everybody? I would have gone in there and I would have gone in with the intent to win. And probably Barry Goldwater had the best idea of what was going on, but we should never get into a war just to prop up some puppet government, because it has never worked and never will work. So that's my opinion now. That's not everybody's consensus by any stretch, sir.
Do you believe in the domino theory then? Like, how if one country's communist, it'll just spread and spread until eventually it gets...
Yeah,
like
you can see what happened in Vietnam's a prime example of that. Is the communists took over Vietnam. We tried to stop them, but the communists took them over. And let me tell you, a little sideline to this whole thing is 10 years ago, I went over as a consultant to China. I was a production consultant for Enron Corporation over in China. I spent 2 different tours over there as a consultant. The communist government, I don't believe, and this is my own opinion now, but I don't believe there's any other way that China could control the amount of people that they have other than communism. And I'm not advocating communism by any means, but a socialistic, communistic government like that are the only way that they can control that many people in China. And that influence, I told Mr. McCulkey the other day that an old Chinese guy used to sit out on the street drinking beer over in Vietnam, told me, he said, the Chinese came to Vietnam and we chased the Vietnamese out of trees. And he said the French came over and cut their tails off. And he said the Americans came over and gave them motorcycles. That's the evolution of the Vietnamese people, according to this Chinese guy. You have to understand, the Chinese control the economy of Vietnam, did then and still do. They control it. The Vietnamese all work for the Chinese over there. The Chinese control everything, and they did at that time too. So that's kind of where we were at. Anybody else?
And we're about to run out of time, but I hope if you haven't done your oral history, your interview with someone, he gave you a couple names of community members. So if you want to stay and ask him a question or thank him for coming today, just hustle to class and you won't be late. But hold on, let's power clap for him. Ready your hands. Thank you for coming and sharing your story, Mr. Nichols. Let's give him 5. Ready?
Thank you. I enjoyed it.